Welcome to Tiny Changes Big Shift podcast, hosted by transformational trainer and catalyst coach Vickidawn. This is a window to what's possible, lifting you to the freedom to take bold action in your recovery, a place where life's challenges are made easy. Hello, Toi. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Our episode today is number 30, Having Difficult Conversations. And my guest is Toi B James, author of Talk About It, 12 Steps to Transformational Conversations, even when you disagree. Can you tell us a little bit more about your book, a little bit about you, what you do?
Sure. The book, Talk About It, really is a practical guide that people can use to have difficult conversations. And so when we say courageous conversations, this book really gives you 12 steps based on coaching techniques. Because as a certified coach, we are trained to actively listen, hold space for people in a real way, navigate difficult conversations. And so the book really gives readers practical tools. And as far as my background, I am the founder and chief impact officer of RedInk Enterprises, which is a boutique DEI&B, diversity, equity, and belonging firm that specializes in inclusive communications and engagement. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here, and I'm excited for our show topic today. We all have those conversations that are difficult. We get stuck repeating the same conversations. I know my husband and I spent some years doing that, revisiting them, and we could almost write the script. And some topics also are so uncomfortable, we just don't know how to move them forward. Maybe a work relationship or a family situation.
Mm-hmm.
So your book I found really valuable in that way because it does give you such a nice framework to go deeper. And I appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. You share in your book that you've had uncomfortable moments when others were insensitive in their comments around race. Some people would just wait for others to just get it. But this book is very proactive and empowering. What allowed you to develop the 12 steps to transformative conversations?
Yes. So in the intro of the book is a story about a friend of mine, Masood Olafani, who's an artist, who was talking to a gentleman after a performance that kind of depicts slave selling, the selling of enslaved people here in Atlanta. After the presentation or after the performance, which was amazing, a gentleman, an older white gentleman, kind of walked up to him and said, why are we still talking about this? And I, although I couldn't really hear everything, I wanted to, I was trying. I monitored the body language and the patience and the active listening and how he kept the door open for discovery, for understanding for the both of them, right? And so after the conversation, let's fast forward a couple of weeks, I met with him. I was like, how did that go? How did you do that? Because that would have paralyzed me because at the time, so much was happening in the country that was harmful and painful as a Black woman to navigate in the world. So talking about race became very difficult because, of course, I've grown up seeing people harmed because of something they can't change. And it's just unreasonable, quite frankly, racism is. And so when I met with my friend, my student, I was like, so what happened? He was like, well, I gave him my number. I gave him a call to see if he wanted to continue the conversation. And we did, after some hesitation, talk a little bit. And I asked him if he would like to continue, can always call me. And we can continue talking about what happens within the African-American community, our history, why it's important to continue the conversation about our history. And he just kind of became my hero in that space, right? So fast forward, I received an email from a friend of mine who was like, this would be good for you. And it was information about Coach Diversity Institute, which is where I was trained as a certified coach. And I would have to say after that, I actually got my voice back because I understood that it's not just about my feelings to push a conversation forward. It really is about the people I'm engaging. And it's really about discovering. It's really about inquiry. It's really about asking the questions to understand, not necessarily change anyone's minds, because we're going to disagree, period, in some cases. But when that light bulb moment happens for either one of us, for clarity of understanding, it's a wonderful thing. And then there's a door opened to continue.
That is such a different approach to getting defensive or angry, or when there might be a lot of justification to get angry or defensive in some cases.
Exactly.
You give a clear and thoughtful discussion on challenges to approaching conversations around race, politics, religion, and in the workplace. I want to focus on the family and the application of your tools to improve relationships.
Sure.
To start with, you provide 3 levels of communication in your book, and I especially like the distinction of a transformational conversation versus a positional or a transactional conversation. That was a little light bulb moment for me, believe me. Can you tell us the difference and the benefits to use this model to go deeper?
Oh, absolutely. So we'll start with transactional, and we all participate in that. And really, transactional is just asking or telling, right? Like, hey, can you, will you, are we going to, yes, no, we're going to do this instead, however the response is. End of conversation. Positional is more about advocating, this is where I stand, this is what I believe, this is why. And you could even ask, what do you believe? And what is your why? But then that's kind of the end, unless you actually explore. And with transformational conversations, it's really about co-creating, because it's about sharing and discovering and asking thoughtful questions and keeping the door open for continued conversations and exploration, which can really just, at minimum, you can develop a higher level of understanding, but more importantly, you can build connection to continue as you both grow, right? So I just think having transformational conversations is actually doable, even in conversations that are difficult.
I know I wish I had this framework in a couple of work relationships I had in my past I didn't know how to take it any further. And so it became really passive, aggressively adversarial, I would say. I know I have, and I think most of us do have conversations with the expectation that we will come to an agreement. You propose that that's not the goal. What is the goal in your opinion?
Okay, I will say in some cases, the goal may be just to come to some sort of conclusion. But for transformational conversations, it really is to understand and to connect. Again, because there will be moments when you just disagree, but that shouldn't end the conversation if you explore the why, the when, where did you hear that, or where did you get your information, or what experience did you have that brought you to this position, or what if I said this, would this alter your thinking? Not necessarily change it, but does it add another layer to what you're saying? So it really is just about asking thoughtful questions and listening intently to understand what the person's actually saying. And when I say listen intently, it's also watching body language. It's listening for the silences and giving them space to kind of think through their thoughts. Because sometimes questions do that. Not that they necessarily stump you, that's such an abrupt word, but they give you pause because it's not something you considered before.
Right.
And if you just hold space for people to let them examine their own thoughts, sometimes the light bulb moment or another thought comes to them in that time that could change the course of the conversation.
I especially like your use of silence. We like to fill that silence, and if we let it be there, I know my husband is a more deliberate, thoughtful person, and he needs to take time and think things out. And I'm a jabber. And so giving him that space is probably a big step towards that connection. I also agree is a very good goal, because that's what we all want, isn't it? Do feel like there's 2 ships passing in the night sometimes because we're not experiencing that connection.
Exactly. And there are moments where people will not want to understand or connect. They just want to say what they have to say, and recognize that if that's the case, you can decide to listen. Like, I'm just going to listen because they are not open to a conversation, or you could decide, you know what, until we're both ready to really exchange conversations, let's just table this. Because I think we're both really not prepared to have a serious, thoughtful conversation about this.
And I like that it's a direct approach to not just trying to feel somebody out or getting hurt feelings because you started a conversation and they say, whoa, I don't want to talk about that. I know that listening with empathy and compassion does take effort. Do you have tips on how to show that you're communicating and using them?
I'm sorry, that I'm communicating in what way?
Using the compassion and empathy?
Oh, yes. So there is a story in the book that really kind of demonstrates what empathy and compassion are, because we tend to use the words interchangeably sometimes, and they're very different. Like, empathy really is about understanding. I hear you. This is what I heard. Compassion is, I hear you. This is what I heard. What can I do? There's action attached to compassion. So the story in the book, which is really about a child sitting at the table doing their homework and saying, oh my gosh, mom, dad, I don't understand this. And a parent can show empathy saying, oh my gosh, I hear you don't understand this. It must be difficult. What are you going to do? With a child maybe asking for compassion, like, oh my gosh, it seems like it's really difficult. How can I help you? What can I do?
Yeah,
and like you have to choose what you're going to do. And you have to be very deliberate, because to be helpful, you have to define what that looks like.
And maybe ask what would be helpful to them.
Exactly.
Yeah. What would support you? What would make this easier? I can envision times that would have been useful with my kids too. I was a single parent for 11 years with 5 kids. So wow. I wasn't always very empathetic or compassionate. It was more like chop, chop, get it done. So hindsight's always 20/20. I especially like stating what you want to gain from the discussion up front and asking the other person what they'd like to see happen. That just seems so refreshing and so simple. I don't know why people don't think of it. Do you have tips for those of us who may have a partner or a child that resists this type of conversation?
Sure. Before you even ask that question, the advice that I give, or the recommendation that I share, is one, tell them your why. And your why can be deeply personal. It's not just about, well, I want you to do this. It's, I care about you, and I know that this is important to you. The end result is incredibly important to you. So I would love for us to talk about this particular topic, because it will get you to where you want to be, because I care about you. And so from there, you could say, okay, this is why I think this is an important conversation. Why would this matter to you? How would this connect to you? And once you understand their why, it's easier to navigate the conversation, so you don't kind of go off the rails and you start thinking about yourself, if indeed it is to support that other person. Yeah. And if it's to support the both of you, you guys can put guardrails around what it is you're discussing before it gets out of scope.
Yeah, the kitchen sink, the incident 10 years ago.
Which is why it's important to actually just think about that, so you both can decide, like, oh, I think we're kind of getting off topic here, unless that kitchen sink applies. I mean, it depends on what the conversation is. But you can decide together, like, okay, yeah, you're right. That's not what we're here for. We both decided that we care enough to talk about this.
And I like the commitment that you bring to the conversation, that I would bring to a conversation like this, to really want to move forward and not just advocate for my position or prove I'm right or convince you that you really messed up there and you should have done it different, and the habits like that we fall into in our communication. Mm-hmm. I was lucky in that I had a sponsor when I was early in the program who told me to listen to everybody, because I might learn something. So it's a habit that I formed, and I still practice that today. I listen carefully to something everybody says around the table, and I'm grateful for that practice. And I can't say that I've listened to my family with that same intention. I can see the value when I do it there, And how does that improve relationships, do you think?
When I think about how I feel when someone listens to me, and I feel as if I'm seen, heard, and respected, and that they respect all of me and my opinions, even when they don't necessarily agree with me, but they're willing to hold space for me. I know how important that makes me feel and how my vulnerability is held with care. And I, in turn, want to do the same thing. I also know what it feels like when someone does not care and will not listen to me and don't really care about my opinion, although they'll pretend like they're listening. And I never want to make anyone feel that way.
Yeah, that's really a commitment to connection.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
And if you care, and my hope is that people do, like, even if a topic that they disagree about, if they don't necessarily even like the person as a person in front of them, if they care about mankind, identify what it is that makes this particular conversation that you're having important, potentially to the both of you, even if it's just for you just to explore, to understand. Just understanding what that is will allow you to remain calm and to just investigate, just to examine and explore. I think that's where the magic happens. People can look at me and assume a lot of things, but if they actually ask me the right questions, they'll find like, oh, I didn't think you'd like that, or I didn't know you were from the South, or I didn't know your father listened to country music and you like big rigs. There's so much. We know all of our favorite things, but if we really want to get to know someone, there's so much you don't know about the person in front of you besides what you think is different.
Yeah.
Or the same.
You use the word vulnerability, and I know that working woman, I was CPA, so I was mostly in a man's world, so to speak, and attempted to always be tough and strong and no emotions because I thought that was what was part of the deal to show up. And I think if I would have used vulnerability in that relationship that I had so much trouble with, but I was so frightened to be vulnerable. I felt so open to attack and misunderstanding. Is there a way I could have prepped that, do you think, in my own mind to shift? Maybe being clear about the why myself, or
what comes to mind for me with that, without knowing the full story about the relationship that you're referring to, is really about being your authentic self and what that is. And so let's just start there. Were you authentically who you were, even to allow space for any level of vulnerability? And what did that other person miss because they didn't get to know you as a whole person? Where maybe they saw a wall and met the wall with the wall.
Yeah.
So
that's a very good point.
So I would always advise people, like, be as authentic as you possibly can be with the people who are around you. One, so you could be your best self. Because when your wall has to go up, you just are not, you don't have the same level of energy to do the best in that role or position or in that space, because you're not your best self, because you're not yourself.
Yeah. Honesty and vulnerability, even if the other person doesn't understand, is always a good place to start from.
Yeah.
And then you can take it from there if you do need to put up a wall, because there are, like you said earlier, points where the person isn't ready to talk about it, maybe will never be ready to talk about it. And then I would infer I would get to decide how to move forward in the future around topics of importance.
And with whom? And I would preference saying the word boundaries than wall.
Yes. Walls are permanent, can tend to be permanent. Boundaries can be raised and lowered or altered or moved or, exactly. I love that too. Yeah. Yeah. When I was younger, I had a lot of those permanent walls and I learned a lot about boundaries. Do you have any final thoughts about your book or about your experience writing the book? Did it come quickly? Did it come easy? Was it just there waiting in a container, and all of a sudden, boom, you.
It was funny how it happened. Because we're in a pandemic, I was exhausted from work. We had a lot of changes, and I was a part of the change manager strategy with managing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging for my organization as well as my regular job. They just needed someone who understood the work, who understood the teams. I'd been there for 6 years, or about 6 years. So I understood the needs of my colleagues. And what I did not understand, they also knew that I was willing to explore because I was a coach. It was like, this is what you do. You were a certified diversity coach. Can you help us? And I was like, I absolutely can. This is what I love to do. And so I think it was the end of December, just around the holidays. And I was kind of winding down, although it took a minute, because when you're super busy all the time, your brain doesn't catch up with the exhaustion of your body.
Yeah, I know.
I was sick of watching television, but it was on. It's usually on for noise. And I said, well, you know what? Everyone's always saying they don't know how to have the conversation. In corporate America, after the death of George Floyd, he was like, we don't know what to say.
Yeah.
I care about my teams, but I don't know what to say. And I would always say, well, lead with that.
Yeah.
That's your honest position. And if you care about them, that is a wonderful thing to say to them. I care about you. I don't know what to say, but what can I do for you? How can I help?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you give them the power to determine what the next step is. And so as I thought about always hearing that, as well as to my friends, like, I can't talk politics, I can't do this because it's so nerve-wracking. And because I had been there, I understood. I was like, I really want people to talk to each other. So I just started writing notes down while TV was watching me. And I thought, I'll write an outline. Then let's fast forward 3 days. I'll go ahead and start the first chapter. I'll start doing some research. And I did that every night for a month. And the first draft was born. And so I just determined that I wanted to encourage and inspire 1 million transformational conversations. Because I think a lot of what we're seeing in the world today is lack of empathy and compassion, a lack of understanding, but a desire to belong to groups. Because we're always online. It's like, well, I believe this. And I was like, do you know where they got this information from?
Right.
What do you really believe?
Yeah.
And because I want to understand you, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's important to me. I think the more we really engage each other in thoughtful, honest, authentic conversations, the farther we'll get. And that's just the first step. There's still a lot of work to be done. Certainly when you talk about inclusion and belonging, diversity and equity as well. My specialty is inclusion and belonging, communications and engagement. So I am in that first step, like, you got to first acknowledge it, and then you got to talk about it, and then you got to make a plan. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we can't even talk about it.
Yeah. After reading your book and thinking through the concepts, one thing that I think it will empower me to do is when somebody does say something different, I used to just feel uncomfortable and afraid and change the subject. Now I think it will give me that opportunity to ask more questions. Oh, well, that seems like a strong statement. Where did that come from? Or, not take it so serious, like, oh my God.
And sometimes you have to do it even while you're uncomfortable, because you'll still be uncomfortable, like in some cases.
Yes.
But the steps will give you it's a practical guide to knowing what the next step is. Yes. How do you hold space for yourself? And how do you identify, one, this may cause me harm. I am going to back away from this. Or this fear is not real. Let me just ask more thoughtful questions because I don't understand and I really want to. So let me stand here in my own power and allowing that person to stand in their own truth. And then we exchange to get to know each other. And you can make those decisions.
Yeah. And trust yourself comes to mind.
Yes.
Trust yourself.
And if you make a mistake, what can you do? You can apologize.
Apologize.
It's so easy. Like, oh my God, it feels like I'm so embarrassed. I don't even know what to say that. Say that, you know what? I think I said something that was insensitive and I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. How could I have said that differently? Because I don't want to make that mistake again.
Yeah. And those types of communications are simple, but so powerful. I think sometimes we think it has to be complicated or harder, or just the elegance of,
Yeah.
oh, geez, I really messed up there. I feel like I did. Yeah.
And if you care enough, it's easy.
Yes. How does our audience find you, Toi?
Sure. Yes. Again, my company name is RedInk Enterprises LLC, and you can find me at RedInk, and that's RedInk Enterprises.com. And from there, you can get the link to my Instagram and my LinkedIn business pages. And of course, there's a page dedicated to the book itself, so you can have different ways of ordering it. If you want the ebook, the soft copy, all available to you wherever you are, and it's actually shipped internationally. So yeah, I am all over the web and easy to reach. And again, I am a certified coach and a DEI&B practitioner. So if you want some support in that area, I'm also available for that.
I am so impressed with the book. I really am. And with our conversation today, I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for reading the book. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you and your audience. I really, really appreciate it. So yes. Before I go, though, I also want to mention that all of your listeners, if they order the book from bookbaby.com, they'll get a discount, and that information will be on your website, available for a month. Yes.
Okay. Available for a month after the show releases, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And I'll make sure that I highlight that so people don't miss that opportunity. It's just a wonderful book. I've already mentioned it to several people, and I pick it up and hold it so they can see the cover. And there's a lot of books and information about communicating. It's hard to find a new angle, and I don't want to use the word angle, but a tool that feels refreshing and real and solid. Yeah. I really appreciate that.
I wrote the book that I wanted to read. If I didn't know this, that's the kind of book. This is the kind of book I want. Something very practical. Give me steps. Give me examples. Tell me the story. So I wrote the book I would want to read if I did not understand how to communicate, having difficult conversations.
All right. Again, thank you for being here, Toi.
Thank you so much.
To my audience, thank you for listening. I love emails from you. Send them to info@Vickidawn.com. Tell me what you'd like to hear discussed. Until next time, remember, you create your beautiful life, one moment, one step at a time.